If you've been paying attention to the news, you know that our country is quickly going all out woke. Now, if you're mostly okay with the liberal, left-leaning LGBTQ plus agenda, and you simply keep your mouth shut, you'll probably do fine. You won't be canceled. Your job won't be terminated. Your future won't hang in the balance. On the other hand, if you have serious misgivings or reservations about the LGBTQ plus agenda and you dare to open your mouth to say something about it, you'll probably be canceled. Your job will be terminated. Your future will hang in the balance. Now, we're not at all surprised when cancel culture comes to places like California or New York, to cities like San Francisco or Lower Manhattan. But what are we to make of it when cancel culture comes to America's heartland? What are we to think when ordinary folks living in small town USA are canceled for their beliefs or even their doubts concerning the so-called sexual revolution? Now, maybe you think cancel culture would never come to America's heartland. Perhaps you think cancel culture would never come to such places as Kansas or Oklahoma. But if you think that way, you'd be wrong. Because of course, cancel culture has already happened. And in fact, it still continues to happen in America's heartland. Last fall, a Christian man working in the public schools in small-town rural Kansas was given disciplinary action, and ultimately his job was terminated because of his Christian beliefs. That man's name is Randy Just. And today, Randy joins us here to talk about it. Randy, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Randy, for those in the audience who don't know who you are, before we even dive into the events from last fall, tell me briefly just a little bit about yourself, your family, your previous careers and jobs and the like.
Sure. I was raised with two brothers on a farm. We went to church all the time. We grew up in kind of the simple farm life, and eventually after college I was married, had two sons. I went into the business of outdoor recreation, and I was a park ranger for 30 years. After that period of time, I found a job that I thought, wow, I think I could do this. This would give me an opportunity to help some kids. I could go and work in a school side by side with them and kind of step back from the career, getting ready to retire. So this would still challenge me. So that's what I ended up doing. Ended up actually in El Dorado Middle School.
And so you would go into the schools. You were working with, I guess you could say, a third-party organization going into the schools. What did you do in the schools?
Right. I worked for an organization. It's a nonprofit named Sparkwheel. And in that organization, the organization sent people into the school to see how students are doing. We worked mainly with at-risk students, and we helped them actually in any way, shape, or form get over barriers and get through school. So it was rewarding. It was still fun. I get along good with kids, and I was really enjoying my position.
And how long did you work for Sparkwheel in that capacity?
I worked, this would have been, was completing my 8th year.
And so with Sparkwheel in El Dorado at the middle school, you would go into the middle school 4 or 5 days a week, or how many days?
I was there full time. Just actually, my hours were similar to a teacher. And I worked side by side with teachers also to find out about students. If they had a student that they thought that we could help in any way, sometimes they referred them to our program. And then when they did that, we had the parents sign off to allow them to work with me, which gave me just a little extra time to be with them, or maybe even come out of class towards the end of class or something to help them or assist them. And it was a way to really be in the school, knowing what students do, and then I could see where they needed help rather than maybe come in after school and do like a tutoring program or something like that.
And so, this being your 8th year, you've no doubt interacted with a number of students. I think you, if I understand you correctly, a student might have some sort of difficulty or challenge, and they would maybe be referred to you. They would come into your basically your office classroom area and spend some time with you.
That's basically correct. I sometimes went to class with them to see, maybe I needed to check on their behavior to see how they were doing in class. Maybe I would work with a student and help them get along with other students. Maybe it was something to where they weren't working very well, their attendance was low. It could be grades, it could be behavior, it could be their attendance. Anything that the person was having a rough time with. Those barriers is what we worked on.
What in those several years, good number of years that you worked with the middle schoolers, what were some of your favorite aspects, some of the more rewarding aspects of your work?
Oh yeah, man, there were times when one of my most I guess rewarding times was when I was working with a boy, and he had behavioral issues. He had some challenges mentally, and it was really rough for him to interact with other students. He was brilliant, but he had trouble socially. So we got together, and he would come into I didn't call it my office because I wanted to make it less formal for the students. So I just said my room. That's the school lingo, So he would come into my room if he had a problem. He would come into my room sometimes just to see how he should maybe react in a certain situation, or maybe if they had lost a soccer game in PE and he was upset by it. And I got to see him really grow in those areas. He still had challenges, but he grew in those areas, and I thought it was something that we got along well with, and he was very happy to have me by his side.
And I'm guessing with that number of years of experience, you would sometimes run into these students outside even of the school, maybe in town or other places?
Yes, actually, I just saw a student last week working in one of the businesses downtown, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Just," because they had to call me Mr. Just in school, and he says, he's asking how I'm doing and all that, and anyway, I would see students, my wife says, in fact, we can't go anywhere where there isn't a student running up to Mr. Just and giving him a hug or saying, "How you doing?" or wherever, whatever. And it didn't matter where we are downtown, some student knows me. And the problem is, once in a while I don't recognize them because they've grown, they've matured. The boys have a beard and the girls are all wearing makeup and everything. And I'm going, wow, they've really grown up. So Yeah, I'd see them all the time. We had a great rapport.
That's so good and so encouraging to see and observe some of the impact that you've had on not just these that you've mentioned, but many other countless students. But here we come to an unusual difficulty that transpired last fall. What happened? Where did it begin? What's going on?
Kind of a long story, but it was student teacher conference or parent teacher conferences in October, and I was involved in some of those conferences. I would sit by the student or go to talk to the parent, and that was a time when we could really interact and find out, with each other how things were going. I know it's hard to believe, but once in a while students don't always tell their parents exactly how it's going in school and those types of things. So it was a great opportunity for that. And I was in the hallway getting ready to go back to my room, and I was approached by a lady, and I'm a pretty interactive person. I said hi, and she said hi, and then I started to walk off, and she said, "Hey, aren't you Mr. Just?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Aren't you the one leading that Bible study before school?" And I said, "Well, I facilitated." I said, "It's a student Bible club." But I said, "Yeah, I'm in there with the students and I help them." And she said, "Well, what do you talk about?" And at that point I was going, she seemed harsh. She seemed like I had almost like I'd done something to her or something, and I didn't think too much of it. But anyway, as the conversation went on, she was asking what we did in our Bible club, and I said, the students come in, they usually bring questions and things like that. And I said, I try to let students run the club because it's their club. But I said, as you know, once in a while with middle school students, you have to be there just to make sure they don't beat each other up or whatever the case is, But we had some pretty good kids in there. But still, and she said, "Well, what do you talk about?" And I said, "Well, they talk about things in school, they talk about life, they talk about the Bible, and they'll ask questions about it." And she goes, "Like what?" And I said, "Well, there could be several questions." And I said, and she goes, "Well, what do you tell them?" And I said, "I tell them the truth." And she said, "Well, what's truth?" And I said, "It's not a lie." I said, "This is their Bible club." I said, "We tell them what's in the Bible." And she said, "Well, my son comes to that." And she goes, "I want you to know he comes from a very unconventional family." I said, "Oh?" And she said, "He has 2 moms." I said, "Okay." I hear that kind of stuff in middle school. I just said, "Okay." And she said, "So what do you tell him?" I said, "I don't even know him. I didn't know who her son was, or I didn't know her name. I had no idea who this lady was." And she proceeded to just drill me on things like this, various questions and things like that. Well, in the meantime, I had seen she had a rainbow bracelet, and she, so I was thinking, okay, maybe, I don't know what she's getting at here. And then she said, "The Bible's a big book." And I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "Well, do you tell them certain things that they need to know? What you think they need to know?" I said, "No, I don't tell them anything about me, what they need to know or anything." I said, "We go if they have questions about anything, we go into the Bible and find answers. I said we only go from a biblical point of view, from a Christian worldview, from the Bible. I said that's basically how we answer, or how I answer. Well, she just kept throwing things out to me, and she said, "Well, you said you still tell truth to them." She said, "What all do you tell them?" And I was going, I don't know what to say much anymore, you know. And I said, if they ask me questions, I tell them. I said, I tell any student, I will only tell them truth. I said, that goes for whoever, wherever in the school. They're not here to learn lies. They're here to learn truth. And she said, well, again, she was asking what is truth, the whole thing, and I said, look, if a person comes to me and says, I want you to call me a boy's name, and she's a girl, I say, I can't do that. I said, I will tell you the truth, but I said, here's what I will do. I will treat you with the same love and dignity and respect that you deserve as any person or student here in this school. And when I said that I wouldn't call her a boy or a girl's name depending on their sex, she blew up. She lost it. And she said I was a hater. She said I was one of those. She said this conversation is over. And she said again that I was a hater. And I said, I didn't say anything about hate. I said, I'm sorry if you don't agree. We still, that doesn't mean that we can't get along. And she said this conversation's over. She screamed in the hall and she said something about, I am not talking to you anymore. I said, okay. And that was it.
And then she walked off.
And she walked off.
Now, how, obviously, this was unexpected, and I'm surely coming at just a high pace, fast tempo. You're surprised. Her tone is a bit shocking. How, in that moment, how are you reacting, even internally? That's probably, I would assume, one of the first times you've been, I guess you would say, berated in such fashion.
Over something like that, yes. Fortunately, two things. One, being a park ranger and law enforcement officer, I've been skinned verbally before. And also, being a Christ follower, I know that it does no good to react negatively to someone like that. So I tried to maintain composure, and I thought I did. I didn't get excited or anything like that. Like you say, internally you're going, what brought all this about? What is this for? I have no idea, except when I saw that rainbow watch band, it made me think, okay, she's got some sort of an agenda here. And I had people tell me, well, you should have just not said anything. I had nothing to hide. I was not doing anything wrong. I had no policy that I was breaking. I wasn't doing anything, especially from the point of she comes to me and she's asking me questions. Okay, if she's asking me questions, I'm going to try and accommodate her as, the best that I can.
So you then that night, maybe the next day or something, some point there's you discover, okay, that this didn't end in the hallway.
I did. Actually, it was about 2 hours after that. It was just about lunchtime at this point when she approached me, and I went back to my room. let me back up with one thing. On the way back to the room, it was the teacher's lounge, and they had some food for people in there. I stopped to get a little food, and one of the teachers said hi, and I said, and she's a friend of mine, and I said, boy, did I just get tarred and feathered in the hallway. She said, what? And I said, yeah, I don't know who this lady was and whatever, but she just went on, and I kind of described her, and she goes, I know who that is. She said, she's trouble. And I didn't say anything as far as what was said, as far as, anything personal or anything. She already knew this person. So anyway, I go back to my room, and about 2 hours later, in comes the principal.
Of the middle school.
Of the middle school, yes. The principal and the assistant principal. And he's carrying a cell phone like this. Well, I don't know very many people that talk on the cell phone carrying it like this. And I kind of thought that was strange, but whatever. And so I get along great with them, and I said, hey fellas, what's up? And they said, the principal says, we have your director and your HR on the phone, and they want to talk to you. Okay. I hadn't done anything wrong.
2 hours after the hallway dialogue.
Yeah, 2 hours. And I said, okay. And they said, or my HR director comes on the phone, and she says, we received a call from the USD 490 office, and it was a complaint about you with an interaction with a lady in the hallway, and they said you need to take your things and go home. And I said, what for? And they said, well, you're going to be suspended, and you need to go home, and we'll talk about it in the morning.
Wait, so the principal is sending you home. No conversation to even ask you, hey, I hear, a parent called in, said there's some issues. Let's talk about it. Can we hear your side of the story first before we send you home?
My organization was sending me home because of what they had been told by the superintendent's office through the principal. Principal calls my director, or actually the superintendent called my director. They went back to the principal, and then he comes in. They have all four of them on the two here and two on the phone. Yes, nobody talks to me about anything. They just said, you go home.
So the superintendent, the principals, the people from your organization, no one actually goes to you first to even say, hey, we're hearing some rumblings, a parent has a complaint. It's just automatic, you're going home, basically.
That's exactly right. And I said, no, I'm not going to go home. Let's talk about it right now. And there was silence for a couple seconds, and then, nope, you go home. We'll talk about it in the morning. They said, give the principal your keys, and you're dismissed for the day, and you'll be on suspension.
Suspension?
Yeah. And I said, okay. So I walk out of the school. Well, keep in mind, it's parent-teacher conference. So kids are coming in, there's parents coming in, all this. Well, kids know me. Every kid in the school knew who I was. And I walked out, and there's kids coming up to me, hey, Mr. Just, and there's some hugs, and hey, how you doing, and all this. My phone rings. I'm not even off the school sidewalk into the parking lot. My phone rings, I pick it up, and it's the assistant principal. And he says, you need to get to your car. And I said, that's what I'm doing. Well, you're stopping to talk to students. I said, I'm not stopping to talk to anybody. They're stopping me. I said, they want to say hi. They know, they're giving me hugs, all this. He goes, you better get to your vehicle. Okay, whatever.
Randy, had you ever had issues with the principal or assistant principal, or even for that matter, Spark Wheel before?
No. I had a total clean record. After 8 years, I had not even a smudge on an evaluation with the school. I mean, I thought the principals were both trusting in me. I thought I had individual meetings with them. I've had committee meetings with them, all kinds of that. We get along great. That's why I approached them like I did when they came in. I said, hey, fellas, just very casual. And boy, it was like, you better get in your vehicle and get out of here before you, I don't know, do something to a kid, I guess.
So you go home. Obviously, that's incredibly frustrating, and no sense of even due process or even just gentle thoughtfulness on their part to weigh the entire situation and even ask you anything. But you go home that day, right after lunch, it turns out, and then what?
It's about mid-afternoon, and I'm still, like you say, trying to process it all, understand what's happening, and I think, well, okay, so I believe I got an email later that evening, it could have been in the morning, saying we'll get a phone call going and then we'll be able to talk and see what's going on. Okay, so I did receive that, and whether it was that day or the next day, I think it was the following day then, my HR person calls me and puts me on a Zoom type call and says, well, we had the report from the superintendent that you had an inappropriate conversation with a parent and that you harassed them, and that now we also hear that you were stepping out of line with the kids' Bible club. And I said, well, I said, where do I get to talk here? I said, maybe I think we should hear it from my side. And so they finally did give me an opportunity with HR to tell what happened. And I did. I told basically the same thing that I just told you here earlier. And at that point, they said, well, we are going to keep you on suspension and we will do an investigation.
Did they give you any time frame?
They didn't know when it would be. So it was probably 4 days, 5 days possibly, and they had concluded their investigation and they came back with multiple issues that they had where I had caused problems, they said.
Through this incident?
Through this incident, yes.
So after 7 years, no
8.
problems, on your 8th year, all of a sudden a parent goes nuts over a conversation they started. They report you, they say something to the administration doesn't ask questions. The superintendent, the principal, the assistant principal, they don't go to you, but all of a sudden you're dismissed, and then your organization basically says, we're going to do an investigation. They do an investigation, presumably again not asking you any follow-up questions before they can make their conclusions, and they say, oh, here's all the black marks on what you've done in this situation that are wrong. And how did they handle that?
Yeah, correct. Essentially, they did come back with their investigation, not allowing me to give any rebuttal or anything against that investigation. And they said that here are your issues. Interestingly enough, during their investigation, they said that they had heard that 4 or 5 years ago I had given a student some sort, I think the word was reference or something to that effect on religion and politics. And but it was 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't really, it wasn't really documented when for sure, but somewhere in there I must have done that.
Like mention something about, say, Christianity.
Yeah, and normally the only time I do that, I did that in the school, is if a child asked me. They asked me, in fact, I thought it was okay. If they ask you the question, I thought it was okay to answer them. Apparently not, even whatever, but they said I'd given advice, I believe was the word, on Christianity and politics. No, religion, not Christianity. Religion and politics. So there was that. Then they said that I hadn't broken or violated any of Sparkwheel's policies. Not violated any of Sparkwheel's policies, but since the school complained about me, they said that I had the harassment. I had had an inappropriate conversation. I had, and also on the kids' Bible club, that I had violated school policy on that, and that something more on the Bible club. But interestingly enough, too, the Bible club was okayed by the student council. I took the proposal at the request from the kids. They came to me. I took the proposal to the principal at first, and he was just going to okay it. And then he said, no, let's take it through the superintendent's office. And he took it through the superintendent's office. The superintendent said that you need to make it a club. That way there won't be any issues. Okay. So we go back again and we go to the student, a student and I went to the student council. We proposed, and he did all the proposing and everything. The student did all the proposing, and they unanimously approved the club.
And yet, after this hallway incident, again brought by a parent who instigated and initiated the conversation that's under controversy, after all of this, the school is, Sparkwheel, but through the complaint of the school is saying, oh, you did some different things you shouldn't have done, even though it was the school. You were basically had been walking down the very parameters they had given you.
Correct. That is correct.
It makes no sense. It sounds like total cowardice on the part of the school. What, after the Sparkwheel gave you, the HR department gave you kind of this rundown, what were the next steps for them?
The next step, they were putting me on probation and put me on 6 months probation.
What does that mean?
And that's what I asked. I said, okay, what does this probation include? Well, you will have to, I call them watch Do Better movies and take some courses and pass some tests that show that you are able to mind your P's and Q's basically while you're in school or on the job, whatever. So I did that. I thought, okay, I'll do what they want me to do. I'll take care of it. And I finished those in basically less than 3 months. And then the next time we had a meeting, the HR director was in our meeting also. And I thought, she's never in our meetings. It was just my director and myself. And I asked her about being taken off probation since I had everything done. Well, yeah, we could probably do that. We'll double check it, but probably do that. And then the HR person told me, well, I won't take much of your time. I just want you to know that your funding for your position, since we aren't grant funded on this particular position, by the end of June, your funding, there's no funding for it, so your job will be ending.
No, hold on. So you're saying you were put on this so-called probation for this up to 6 months. It was less than 6 months, I guess it turned out. But they didn't let you go back into school in
Nope.
that time. They, I guess, reassigned you to a different task in the meantime?
Correct. I wasn't clear on that. When they sent me home on suspension, they said, you will be working from home here on out. And I said, okay, and then they explained some of the things I would be doing. I said, okay.
A job working with students previously,
Yes.
now somehow working at home.
Right. I was the person with leprosy, so I would be staying home. And so they had me work in that position. Well, I thought, this is interesting. I wonder, when I'm going to be able to go back to the school or whatever. At that time, too, I find out they hired another person for this position in the school and had that person come in and start. And so I pretty well...
Someone basically replacing
Yeah.
you at the school in person, doing the job that you've been doing for 7 years,
Yeah.
but then magically being reassigned at home until further notice. But what you're saying just a few moments ago was 3 months into this new at-home position, they somehow just kind of out of nowhere come to you and say, oh, by the way, the funding for your at-home position is drying up.
Correct. And I don't know the timing for sure. It could have been 3 or 4. That's really immaterial, but still, they said that. But the good news was that since I'd finished all my probation and all of the training and everything that I had to do, that I was going to be in good standing with Sparkwheel, so I would be able to apply for any other jobs that may come up in the future.
So they're basically saying, though you've worked for us 7 years, you're in the middle of your 8th year, we're reassigning you to home to get you away from the students or something like that. Then they're saying, we actually don't have that position here a few months into it, going into the next school year. But we won't use this against you if you reapply, when they could have just said, here's another position.
Correct. And I knew that those words were basically just pat on the back words, because they said good luck in your future endeavors in the letter explaining this, after I had heard that in person, or on the phone. So then in the letter it said that those same things, and then good luck in your future endeavors. You never had any marks against you in Spark Wheel, and you're leaving on good standing.
I don't know how any person listening to this interview would hear that and not at some point come to the realization in their mind that this was nothing more than just kind of smoke and mirrors. No one wants to fire you right away after this incident, because that all who knows what would break loose. But just kind of slowly reassign you, move you on. But then funding is now out, so it looks like just according to our balance sheet and other things, it all makes sense. There's no more room for you, but hey, we won't use it against you, Randy. That just sounds like just a total joke.
And legally, why, it all holds water, because they put me in a position, but the funding ran out, so we don't have anything else that we can do with you, even though, by the way, I worked here, this is my 8th year. So I thought that was a little unique in the fact that, they couldn't even offer me something and even turn me down. But,
yeah, that clearly they terminated you without terminating you. And yet, here we live in a free society.
Yeah.
We live in America, the home of the brave. We live in a place where we have constitutional rights, we have First Amendment rights, we have all kinds of rights, we have due process. None of that was afforded you. And this is the kind of thing that just makes someone go crazy. And yet, my observation through this, I've known you for more than a few years, and during this whole journey in the last year, you have had just an amazing response to it in character, but also just how you've handled yourself. What's been, what they did, both the school, USD 490, the administrator, the superintendent, the principal, the assistant principals, Spark Wheel, all of those involved acted in a most cowardly way, and yet you were anything but cowardly. You were courageous. What for you has been such a difference maker?
My wife and I visited about this quite often, and I had been hearing, like your introduction said, many people who had been either punished, fired, whatever the case was, because of them standing up to some sort of a platform, LGBTQ, whatever. And I've been prepared for this for some years, and knowing that if I wasn't a Christ follower, that might be a total different thing. For me, I know that, okay, God's got this. In fact, my wife and I have been saying, God's got this. Once in a while, I have to kind of reset and think, okay, hey, God's got this. But I know that through this, somehow, God's going to get the glory. And we have, I know it may sound a little cliche or whatever, but my wife and I have been praying for this lady almost daily, that sooner or later she will find Christ through all this. And her family also, I figured out who her child was and all this. Great kid. There'd be nothing more than I'd like than to see those people come to Christ through this. So for us, Christ is the difference maker, and if we wouldn't have had Christ, we may be talking different.
Yeah, it's been so encouraging for me to see your faith in the midst of all this. Here we are at the time of this recording, the first third or first half of June or so. Obviously, by the end of the month, you're basically end of contract that somehow magically is no more basically a termination without calling it a termination transpires, and yet to see your courage and profound and very deep Christian faith to walk humbly and courageously, I think just speaks volumes of your Christian character, but also what a witness for Christians everywhere who are listening to this, where we need, as some have said, we need to have a theology of what does it mean to get fired? Because you never know when an opportunity is going to come, or to stand up for Christ, stand up for the truth. May cost you dearly, and certainly it has cost you, and yet King Jesus will be glorified. So I just want you to know, first I'm thankful for you to take the time to, I don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks. I know the Lord always provides for his people, but for my part, I feel very encouraged, and I know Christians everywhere. This is one more witness of, hey, you know what? Even when things get tough and people say hard things and even harsh things, we can keep running the race. And so I know that's a tremendous legacy that you're leaving even in this community. So I thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks.
Today.
Thank you.